The morning of March 14, 1851, began like any other at Henderson Plantation. Sunlight spilled across the rolling Alabama fields, and the distant hum of laboring voices floated through the air. But in the overseer's office, Thomas Garrett sat frozen over his ledger. The entry he had just made was simple, only 4 words. Yet those 4 words made his stomach tighten and his hands tremble slightly. Another white infant found. It was the 7th in 3 months. 7 babies, pale-skinned and blonde, left mysteriously in the cabins of enslaved families. Each child was healthy, clean, and carefully wrapped. Each child was a puzzle with no explanation. Henderson Plantation stretched across 2,000 acres of cotton fields, 20 miles south of Montgomery. 300 people lived and worked there, most enslaved. Their lives were measured in bales of cotton, in hoe marks across the soil, in the overseer's ledger that tracked every detail of their existence. For 40 years, the plantation ran smoothly. The enslaved population was stable, the yields consistent, the books balanced. Until now, the first white infant appeared on a freezing January morning. Ruth, a young mother living in cabin 12 with her husband Daniel and their 3 children, had risen before dawn to fetch water. The air bit through her thin dress as she walked past the abandoned cabin next door. Cabin 13 had been empty for months, its former occupants sold downriver to pay off a debt. Ruth froze when she heard it. A thin, reedy cry from inside the cabin. Pushing open the door, she found a baby lying on the rotting floorboards, wrapped in a flour sack. The child was no more than 2 months old, pale-skinned, with a shock of almost white hair. Its cotton gown was simple yet far too fine for someone of Ruth's world. The stitching was precise, perfect, clearly made by skilled hands. Fear curled in Ruth's chest. She knew that unusual things on a plantation were dangerous. A baby like this could bring trouble down on everyone, whether guilty or innocent. And yet, she was a mother, and some instincts ran deeper than fear. She picked up the infant and carried it to the overseer's house. Thomas Garrett had managed Henderson Plantation for 12 years. A man of 43, he was methodical, neither cruel nor kind, and devoted to order. He prided himself on running the plantation smoothly, maintaining both the fields and the enslaved population in perfect harmony. Nothing unusual escaped his notice. When Ruth arrived, Garrett listened to her story with a detached calm, but the ledger sat open before him, waiting to record the next step in this disturbing chain. White babies did not simply appear in slave quarters. Someone had left them, and someone had to know why. Ruth answered Garrett's questions with trembling honesty. She had seen nothing, heard nothing. She had simply found the child and acted as a mother should. Garrett could sense the truth in her fear. He noted it in the ledger and prepared to move the child to someone who could care for it properly. He sent word to the main house. Colonel Marcus Henderson was away in Montgomery, but Mrs. Elizabeth Henderson came immediately. She was tall, her gray hair pulled back into a severe bun, her sharp blue eyes missing nothing. Having raised 4 children of her own, she was experienced in assessing infants. She examined the baby carefully, noting its clean skin, healthy limbs, and fine gown. "Someone has been caring for this child," she said, her voice crisp. "The fabric, the stitching, it is of good quality. This child did not grow up neglected. But who would leave it here?" Garrett asked the question that weighed on both their minds. Why abandon a child in the slave quarters? There are orphanages, churches. Why here? Mrs. Henderson had no answer. She wrapped the baby more securely and arranged for a house servant to take it to the county orphanage. She assumed the matter closed, a mystery, unfortunate but not unprecedented. Yet, 3 weeks later, it happened again. This time, the baby was left in cabin 7. Joseph, a quiet field hand in his 30s, returned home at dusk to find the child lying on his sleeping pallet. Like the others, the infant was pale, healthy, and carefully wrapped. Joseph froze, staring down at the baby with a mixture of awe and fear. No one knew why the infants were appearing, or who left them. Each child was left with care, yet abandoned in the same cold, unforgiving place. Whispers spread through the quarters. Some feared curses. Some whispered of spirits. Others spoke of sins long buried returning to haunt the living. Garrett recorded the discovery in the ledger, the words now etched into his mind, another white infant found. The line of numbers and names suddenly felt meaningless. He could no longer treat this as merely an administrative matter. Something had broken the order of Henderson Plantation, something beyond reason, beyond explanation. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the fields emptied, the plantation seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. The wind carried faint cries, not just of infants, but of secrets waiting to be unearthed. Garrett sat at his desk, staring at the ledger, realizing that the strange occurrences were only beginning. No one could have predicted what would come next, nor the darkness that would grow around the mysterious infants. But for Thomas Garrett, for Ruth, for Joseph, and for everyone at Henderson Plantation, the first chapter of a nightmare had begun. This is part 1, roughly 1,000 words, with an engaging hook at the start. Simple, easy to understand language. A historical horror atmosphere suitable for American YouTube viewers. Natural story flow without dashes. Part 2. The pattern emerges. Joseph froze in the doorway, staring down at the pale infant lying on his sleeping pallet. The baby's blue eyes gazed upward, unfocused, and calm. His mind raced. A white baby in his cabin. The thought of being accused of harming it, of theft, of anything at all, made his chest tighten. In the world he lived in, innocence meant little when someone in power decided guilt. He could not leave the child, could not hide it, could not move it on his own. He had no choice. Trembling, Joseph carried the baby to the overseer's house. Thomas Garrett, upon seeing him approach, felt the first chill of unease creep through him. One baby could be dismissed as tragedy. 2 babies suggested something deliberate. Someone was leaving these infants specifically at Henderson Plantation, carefully choosing the slave quarters for reasons unknown. Garrett questioned Joseph thoroughly. The answers were the same as Ruth's. No footsteps. No voices. No strangers. The cabin had been empty when he left at dawn, and nothing disturbed except for the baby. The child had been placed as if the intruder had anticipated Joseph's return. That night, Garrett inspected Cabin 7 and the surrounding area himself. He examined the ground for footprints, wheel tracks, or any evidence of movement. He asked the neighboring families if they'd noticed strangers or unusual sounds. He inspected the cloth the baby had been wrapped in, hoping for a clue, a laundry mark, a unique weave, a stitch pattern, but found nothing. The cloth was of high quality but otherwise ordinary. The second infant joined the first at the county orphanage, delivered under Mrs. Henderson's watchful eye. The unease in her blue eyes deepened. 2 babies in 3 weeks, both carefully abandoned, both in slave quarters. Garrett began to realize this was no coincidence. A pattern was forming, and patterns demanded explanation. 2 days later, Colonel Marcus Henderson returned from Montgomery. He was a practical man of 58, a self-made success who had inherited a small plantation and built it into a sprawling enterprise. His reputation in Montgomery was solid. He served on the boards of banks, advised fellow planters, and prided himself on running a flawless operation. Yet nothing he had managed prepared him for this. The appearance of white infants on his property could become scandal, the kind of story that spread fast and lingered in whispers. People might wonder what was happening in his slave quarters, why someone would choose his land to leave children, and he could not afford those questions. "Double the night watch," he ordered. Garrett immediately posted men at both ends of the quarters, patrolling every hour from dusk to dawn. Whoever was leaving these children would be caught. There was no other explanation. But the night watch found nothing. The patrols reported only routine activity, the ordinary movements of the enslaved population, the quiet murmur of the plantation at night. No strangers. No unusual sounds. The babies continued to appear, regardless of watchmen or patrols. 3 weeks later, a third infant was discovered. Cabin 19, in the southernmost part of the quarters, became the scene. Hannah, a 24-year-old mother of 3, found the baby in the middle of the night while tending her own child. The infant lay quietly, wrapped in the same clean cloth and simple gown as the others. Hannah screamed, waking her husband and startling neighbors. By the time Garrett arrived, a frightened crowd had gathered outside the cabin. The whispers started immediately. Superstitions flared among the enslaved population. Some spoke of curses, others of spirits wandering unseen. Older residents recalled tales of warning signs from the dead, omens of danger, or punishment for sins long forgotten. Fear settled like a cold fog across the quarters. Garrett ordered the crowd dispersed. Panic was dangerous. Frightened workers were unproductive workers, and spring planting approached. He needed order, not hysteria. He took possession of the third infant, examining it carefully by lamplight. It was then he noticed something new, a small crescent-shaped birthmark on the baby's left shoulder. This mark was distinct, impossible to miss. It was the kind of identifying feature a mother would recognize instantly. Garrett made a note in the ledger, adding it to the growing file on the mysterious infants. 3 babies, all white, healthy, well cared for. All left in slave cabins. All appearing overnight despite increasing security measures. The 4th infant arrived in early March, found by Sarah, an elderly woman who had lived on the plantation for 40 years. She discovered the baby at dawn, placed just inside her door, as if the person leaving it knew she would rise first. Known as a healer, someone skilled with herbs and remedies, Sarah did not scream. She simply wrapped the infant and brought it to Garrett, her eyes quiet but troubled. The 5th appeared a week later in cabin 4, found by a young couple married only 6 months. The 6th appeared in cabin 16, discovered by a stable worker. Each baby followed the same pattern, healthy, clean, dressed in fine cotton, appearing overnight in a cabin with no signs of intrusion. With every new discovery, fear spread among the enslaved population. Work slowed. Sleep became tense. People feared the night, fearing what they might find, who might come, and how the white overseers might respond. Even the overseers felt unease. Garrett increased security again, posting guards at the quarters and patrolling the plantation boundaries. Dogs were brought in, hoping to detect intruders. But nothing worked. Colonel Henderson, sensing the gravity of the situation, called a meeting in mid-March with his senior staff. In addition to Garrett, this included Benjamin Cross, his head driver, William Porter, the stable master, and Margaret Sullivan, his wife's assistant in charge of the household staff. The room was lined with ledgers and books, representing 40 years of careful record-keeping and control. "Gentlemen, and Mrs. Sullivan," the colonel began, standing behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, his voice calm but firm, "We have a problem. Babies, white infants, have been appearing on this plantation under mysterious circumstances. Each is healthy, well cared for, and left in our slave quarters. We have no witnesses, no intruders, no evidence of how they arrive. This cannot continue. We will find an explanation." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Garrett detailed the timeline of discoveries, the measures taken, and the empty results of increased security. Benjamin Cross spoke of the night watches. William Porter mentioned the lack of signs near the stables. Margaret Sullivan added observations from the house staff about nothing unusual in the household. Colonel Henderson listened, his face hardening. This is no longer a question of policy or management. This is a question of control, order, and, potentially, reputation. We cannot let this plantation become the subject of whispers in Montgomery. I want answers, and I want them immediately. Garrett nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility press heavier than ever. He realized the situation had grown beyond administrative concern. Something was happening at Henderson Plantation that no ledger could track, no patrol could prevent, and no simple explanation could solve. The infants were no longer just a mystery. They were a threat, a shadow moving unseen among the fields and cabins, a pattern emerging that defied reason. And as Garrett considered the implications, he felt a chill settle over him, the first real sense that this was only the beginning. Checkmark Part 2 Key Features. Starts with a suspenseful hook. Builds tension with repeated mysterious events. Highlights the growing fear among both enslaved and white workers. Emphasizes the pattern and escalating unease. Maintains simple, easy-to-follow language for American YouTube audiences. Ends on a subtle cliffhanger for Part 3. Part 3. Secrets in the Shadows. Colonel Marcus Henderson slammed his hand lightly on the desk, the sound echoing through the study. "We have a problem," he said, his voice sharp. A problem that defies explanation. 6 white infants have appeared on this plantation over 2 months. Despite patrols, guards, and watchful eyes, no one knows who is leaving them or why. The senior staff exchanged uneasy glances. Garrett, the overseer, felt a chill creep down his spine. This was no ordinary mystery. Each baby was carefully placed, healthy, dressed in fine cloth, left in cabins of the enslaved population. Each was a puzzle, and the pieces did not fit. Could it be someone from outside? William Porter, the stable master, suggested. He was lean, weathered, a man used to horses and the quiet of the fields. Someone using our plantation as a dumping ground. Maybe from Montgomery, someone who knows the layout. Garrett shook his head. No, the patrols would have seen them. No one has entered the plantation at night without being logged. Merchants, neighbors, everything recorded. All during daylight hours. There's no evidence of outsiders. Benjamin Cross, the head driver, leaned forward, his face stern. Then it must be someone inside. Someone who knows our routines, who can move without notice, someone with access to the quarters. Mrs. Sullivan, the colonel's wife's assistant, frowned. And where are these babies coming from? 6 infants don't just appear. Someone is giving birth, caring for these children, then abandoning them. That takes resources, food, cloth, time, privacy. Where is it happening? The room fell silent. No one had an answer. The implications were staggering. Could it really be someone among the enslaved population, working in secret? Or was it someone with access to transportation, able to come and go under cover of darkness? Mrs. Sullivan added, almost whispering, or perhaps the babies aren't being born here at all. Maybe they're being brought from somewhere else, a few hours away, Montgomery, a neighboring plantation, a secluded house. The idea was terrifyingly plausible. Someone with a horse or wagon, a legitimate reason to travel, could move babies under cover of night. A doctor, a minister, a merchant, anyone whose presence wouldn't raise suspicion. The meeting stretched on for an hour with no concrete answers. Finally, Colonel Henderson made a decision. We will conduct a full census. Every person on this plantation will be accounted for. Women of childbearing age will be examined. Supplies inventoried. Every cabin inspected. If there are secrets, we will find them. The next day, the census began. It was a massive undertaking. 300 people, every detail documented. Women were questioned, examined by Mrs. Henderson and Dr. Robert Chambers, the plantation physician. The examinations were invasive, humiliating, but thorough. For nearly 2 weeks, the enslaved population endured the scrutiny, resentment simmering beneath fear. Garrett could feel the tension rise with each passing day. Eyes avoided contact, whispers spread in the quarters, and fear mingled with anger. Yet, the census revealed nothing. All births were accounted for. No secret pregnancies. No missing supplies. No hidden spaces. Every cabin and outbuilding searched. The woods combed for structures or caches. Nothing. And then, on the night the census ended, it happened again. Clara, a 17-year-old laundry maid who lived alone in cabin 9, discovered the 8th infant. She was quiet and withdrawn, with large, dark eyes that seemed to observe everything. She did not scream. She did not call for help. Instead, she wrapped the baby more securely, sitting with it until morning, rocking it gently and humming a tune her mother had taught her. When Garrett arrived, he found her still in the doorway, rocking the infant. There was something in her expression he had not seen before, a deep, profound sadness, as if she understood something no one else could. "Did you see who left the child?" Garrett asked carefully. Clara shook her head. "Did you hear anything?" Another shake. "You said something before, about them being lost, and someone trying to save them." "What did you mean?" Garrett pressed. Tears filled her eyes. "They're lost," she whispered. "All of them. Someone is trying to save them." "Save them from what?" Garrett asked. But Clara said no more. She handed the baby over and retreated to her cabin. Garrett reported the exchange to Colonel Henderson, who ordered Clara brought to the main house for questioning. An hour later, Cross went to retrieve her and found the cabin empty. Panic surged. In 1851 Alabama, The disappearance of an enslaved person was serious, not just a financial loss, but a challenge to control. If Clara had run, others might follow. If she had been taken, it could mean a breach of security. If she had hidden, she needed to be found. A search party discovered her 3 hours later in the old tobacco barn on the eastern edge of the plantation. The barn had been abandoned for years, roof partially collapsed, walls weathered and weak. Clara huddled in a corner, shivering from cold and fear. Cross roughly pulled her out, but Garrett intervened. Carefully, he said, "The colonel needs to question her. He can't get answers if she's injured or terrified." Clara was brought to the colonel's study. She stood small and trembling, surrounded by the wealth and power of the Henderson household. Colonel Henderson regarded her silently for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice gentle. "Clara, I will not hurt you. You will not be punished for running. I only need the truth. Do you know where these babies are coming from?" "No, sir," she whispered. "Do you know who is leaving them?" "No, sir," she repeated. Then she spoke softly, barely audible. "My mama, she told me stories. Stories from before she came here. About places where babies weren't wanted, where they were hidden or made to disappear." "What kind of places, Mrs. Henderson asked, leaning forward. "Big houses, rich houses," Clara said. "When a baby was born at the wrong time or to the wrong person, it could cause shame. People wouldn't ask questions, because questions were dangerous." "And what happened to these babies?" the colonel asked. "Sometimes, they died. Sometimes, they were sold. Sometimes, someone took them far away, where no one would know where they came from." Clara's voice trailed off. "It's a secret, everyone knew it, but no one spoke of it. The big houses, the babies, it was all hidden." The room fell silent. Garrett, Henderson, and Mrs. Henderson exchanged glances heavy with understanding and dread. Could these infants have been abandoned on Henderson Plantation because someone wanted to hide them? Illegitimate children, born into wealth, secrecy preserved, scandal avoided. It was a terrible possibility, but one that made an unnerving kind of sense. The plantation was isolated, yet connected enough to Montgomery society. Safe, discreet, and staffed with people who could care for a child without asking questions. Garrett felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. The infants were not random. They were deliberate, and someone with means, knowledge, and courage, was orchestrating it all in the shadows. Part 4. Shadows among the fields. The wind carried an uneasy chill across Henderson Plantation that morning. Garrett walked the length of the quarters, his boots crunching in the frost-hardened soil. Another baby had appeared overnight. Clara had helped deliver the 8th infant, but now it was clear, someone was still at work. Someone who had no fear of guards, patrols, or scrutiny. Garrett paused outside cabin 9. The door remained closed, the occupants inside whispering among themselves, wary eyes peeking from between curtains. The enslaved population had grown fearful, tense. The whispers weren't just about the babies anymore, they were about curses, about spirits moving unseen, about punishment from forces beyond understanding. Garrett hated superstition, but even he couldn't shake the unease settling in his chest. Inside the main house, Colonel Henderson called another meeting of his senior staff. Garrett, Cross, Porter, and Mrs. Sullivan gathered once more in the study. The ledger containing the records of all 8 infants lay open on the desk. Each entry was meticulous: date, location, finder, and condition of the child. Patterns were emerging, and yet, no explanation. "The babies continue to appear," Henderson said, his voice heavy with frustration. "Each carefully placed, healthy, and well cared for. No one has seen anything. No one knows anything. What do we know that could help us?" Porter shifted uncomfortably. "They all arrive at night. None during the day. No one reports seeing strangers, no tracks, no sounds. Whoever is doing this knows the routines, knows when the houses are empty, and can move without notice." Cross leaned back, eyes narrowing. "It has to be someone with inside knowledge. Someone who understands the plantation, the schedules, the people. But who? And why leave them in the quarters? Why not leave them at the orphanage directly, or in Montgomery?" Mrs. Sullivan spoke softly. Perhaps the babies aren't being abandoned. Perhaps someone is deliberately bringing them here to be found by people they trust, people who will care for them safely until they can be moved on. Henderson rubbed his temples. So, we have someone bringing infants in secrecy from somewhere, delivering them to our property, and disappearing without a trace. And we still have no suspects. Garrett cleared his throat. There is one clue we haven't fully considered, the birthmarks. Only the third infant had a mark, a crescent-shaped port wine stain on the shoulder. Perhaps these marks are not accidental. Perhaps they signify something: family, origin, or protection. The room went silent. Everyone considered the possibility. If the marks had meaning, it implied someone taking care to identify the babies, to leave information for future discovery. This was no random act of abandonment, it was intentional, careful, deliberate. That evening, Garrett walked the fields alone, hoping to clear his mind. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the rows of cotton. He couldn't shake the image of Clara, small and trembling, yet somehow wise beyond her years, murmuring about babies lost and someone trying to save them. He wondered what she knew, and how far back her mother's stories stretched. Night fell, and the plantation was eerily quiet. Garrett patrolled the quarters himself, keeping an eye on the cabins, the shadows, the empty paths between. Hours passed without incident. Then, near midnight, he noticed movement in the far southern field. A figure slipped between the cotton rows, careful, deliberate. Garrett froze, squinting. It was a woman, or a girl, too small to be a full-grown adult. She carried something in her arms, moving with surprising speed and stealth. Garrett's heart pounded. Could it be another infant being delivered? Or worse, someone attempting to harm the children? He followed silently, keeping to the shadows. The figure moved toward a rarely used cabin, where Garrett had once stored supplies for the winter. He approached carefully, gun lowered, every nerve alert. The figure paused, then turned suddenly, as if sensing someone behind her. For a moment, she froze, her face hidden by a dark shawl. Garrett stepped forward. "Who's there?" His voice was steady but firm. The figure bolted, disappearing into the darkness of the woods beyond the quarters. Garrett ran after her, but she was gone, vanished as though the earth had swallowed her whole. All that remained was a soft bundle on the ground where she had paused. Garrett picked it up carefully. It was another infant, wrapped in the same clean, finely stitched cotton as the others. This time, however, the baby had two distinctive marks: a crescent-shaped birthmark on the shoulder, and a faint scar on the wrist. The significance was unclear, but Garrett's unease deepened. He carried the child back to the main house. Colonel Henderson, Mrs. Henderson, and Garrett examined the infant. "Another one," Garrett muttered. "Number 9. We're now at 9 babies in less than 3 months. Someone is making this a deliberate pattern." Mrs. Henderson's eyes were sharp and troubled. "We cannot let this continue. These children are innocent, and yet they are at risk. Someone is risking everything to save them. We must understand why." The next morning, Garrett returned to the quarters. Whispers spread like wildfire. The enslaved population had heard about the night's discovery. Fear mixed with curiosity. No one spoke openly, but every eye followed Garrett's movements. He realized they suspected something was happening beyond ordinary understanding. Clara had not spoken again since the previous night. Garrett wondered what she knew, what she could reveal if pressed. But he also feared the answers, truths that might reach beyond the plantation, secrets tied to families of power, of wealth, of influence in Montgomery. As dawn broke, the wind still cold against his face, Garrett felt the first real sense of dread. These babies were not random. They were signals, messages, deliberate acts of protection. Someone was moving in the shadows, hiding truth in plain sight, and Henderson Plantation had become the stage for a mystery far larger than cotton fields and overseer ledgers. Garrett closed his eyes for a moment, realizing something terrifying: they had no idea who the enemy, or savior, was. And the next delivery could come at any moment, in any cabin, with no warning, no chance to stop it. The plantation held its breath. And in the silence, Garrett understood one undeniable fact: the shadows among the fields were growing bolder. Part 5. The Hidden Hands. The plantation seemed quieter than usual, but Garrett knew better. Silence on Henderson Plantation had never meant peace. It meant tension, waiting, fear of what might happen next. He walked the quarters at first light, checking doors, windows, and paths between the cabins. Every few steps, he glanced at the ground for footprints, anything unusual. There was nothing, except the lingering sense that unseen eyes were watching him, judging him, waiting. Inside the main house, the mood was tense. 9 infants had now appeared, each carefully placed, each healthy, each leaving the staff with more questions than answers. The Hendersons, Garrett, and their senior staff gathered in the study, the ledger open before them. The numbers were almost too overwhelming to comprehend. Someone was orchestrating a plan far beyond their understanding. Colonel Henderson began the meeting with a heavy sigh. "We have 9 infants now, and no sign of the person delivering them. Every precaution, every patrol, every search, has failed. We are being outmaneuvered by someone we cannot see." Garrett leaned forward. "They are not random acts. Each child has been placed deliberately. Some bear birthmarks, some do not. Some are left in cabins closer to the main house, some farther. There is a pattern, though it is subtle, almost invisible to anyone who does not look closely." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "We need to understand the pattern. Why are they left where they are? Why here, of all places? The quarters are dangerous, yes, but they are also the first place someone would think to check. Someone is counting on us finding them." Porter frowned. "And what about timing? Night after night, under cover of darkness. Someone moving in and out without being seen, without leaving evidence. Who could have the skill, the courage, and the knowledge to do this?" Cross, who had spent years managing the workers, said quietly, "Someone with inside knowledge. Someone who understands the people, the routines, and the weaknesses of the guards. That much is certain. But who? A servant, a housemaid, one of the drivers, or someone who works outside the plantation, moving in and out when we aren't paying attention?" Mrs. Sullivan shook her head. "I think we are asking the wrong question. Perhaps the who is less important than the why. Someone is taking extreme risks, moving babies, feeding them, caring for them. That is not done for profit or revenge. That is done to save lives." The room fell silent. The implication was chilling. Someone had turned Henderson Plantation into a sanctuary, a hidden haven for infants at risk. And the fact that they could act unseen suggested a network, a system, a plan larger than anyone could have imagined. Garrett decided he could not wait for another delivery. He began a thorough investigation, reviewing every detail he had collected. The birthmarks, the locations, the timing, all needed to be compared. He mapped each infant's discovery on a rough sketch of the plantation. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The babies were not placed randomly. They were distributed in a deliberate sequence, almost as if someone wanted to test the guards, the staff, the security measures, or perhaps to avoid detection entirely. Some cabins received babies multiple times. Others remained untouched. It was almost as though the person delivering them knew exactly who would find them, and where they would be most safe. That night, Garrett decided to patrol with the help of 2 trusted men. They hid in the shadows, waiting, listening. Hours passed with nothing. Just when Garrett began to doubt he would see anything, a shadow moved across the northern edge of the quarters. It was a woman, small and quick, carrying a bundle. Garrett signaled the men to follow, keeping their distance. The figure moved silently, slipping between the cotton fields, glancing over her shoulder as though she knew she was being watched. She stopped at a small, abandoned cabin and set the bundle down carefully. Garrett approached cautiously, heart pounding. The bundle stirred, a baby. He reached down to lift it, but the woman's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. She was stronger than she looked. "Don't touch it," she whispered fiercely. Her voice was young but firm, filled with authority Garrett had not expected. "Who are you?" Garrett demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The woman hesitated. Then, almost in a rush, she spoke. "My name is Lillian. I have no choice. They are children who would be lost. Mothers who cannot keep them. Families who would hide them or sell them. If I don't act, They die. Do you understand? They die. Garrett stared at her. Her eyes were wide, desperate, but determined. And the plantation? He asked. Why leave them here? Because it is safe here, she said. The quarters, the people, they do not ask questions they should not ask. They care for children when they can. It is the only place I can leave them and know they will survive until they are moved again. Garrett felt a chill. And you do this alone? Lillian shook her head. No, others help. But we cannot be seen. We cannot fail. There are rules, codes, times. We move carefully, silently, because one mistake, one exposure, and everything collapses. The weight of her words hit Garrett like a hammer. He had thought this was a mystery to be solved, a puzzle to uncover. But now he understood. It was not just a puzzle. It was a network of courage, secrecy, and danger that he was only beginning to glimpse. Why me? Garrett asked quietly. Why tell me? She hesitated, glancing around. Because if you interfere, the children die. If you help, you save them. That is all you need to know. Guard your questions, guard your actions. Watch carefully. Do not expose us. And do not tell anyone who cannot be trusted. It will not end well if you do. Garrett swallowed hard. He realized, in that moment, that Henderson Plantation had become more than a farm. It had become a crossroads of life and death, a secret haven for the innocent in a world built on power, wealth, and silence. And he, whether he liked it or not, was now a part of it. Lillian vanished into the night before he could ask more. Garrett stood in the moonlight, the bundle of another white infant cradled in his arms. The wind whispered through the cotton, and the shadows of the fields seemed to watch him. The mystery was no longer about discovery, it was about survival, secrecy, and trust. And Garrett knew, deep in his bones, that the next move could change everything. Henderson Plantation would never be the same again. Part 6. Secrets in the Shadows. The dawn was pale and misty over Henderson Plantation, but Garrett could feel the tension in the air before he even reached the quarters. He had walked these paths hundreds of times, but today the shadows felt heavier, darker, as if the cotton fields themselves were holding secrets. Another baby had appeared during the night. He had a sinking feeling it would not be the last. Garrett moved quickly, checking the cabins where previous infants had been found. The enslaved workers stared at him silently, their fear palpable. They had grown accustomed to the strange pattern of white babies appearing in their midst. Some whispered of curses, others of miracles. Garrett ignored the whispers, focusing on the facts. The babies were real, healthy, and well cared for. But the person delivering them remained invisible, unstoppable, and increasingly bold. Inside the main house, the Colonel, Mrs. Henderson, Garrett, and the senior staff gathered once more. The ledger now contained 10 entries, each meticulously recorded. The pattern was undeniable, yet the mystery remained. This cannot continue, Colonel Henderson said, slamming his hand on the desk. Someone is using this plantation as a hiding place, and we cannot control it. Each delivery undermines our authority, our security, and our reputation. Garrett leaned forward. Colonel, it is clear this is no random act. The deliveries are deliberate, calculated, and executed with knowledge of the plantation's routines. Someone is working from within a network, someone who understands exactly where, when, and how to leave these children safely. Mrs. Sullivan frowned. A network? You mean more than one person? Yes, Garrett said quietly. One person could not manage all of this alone. The timing, the placement, the secrecy, it is beyond what a single individual could accomplish without detection. Porter rubbed his chin. And they have knowledge. They know the patrols, the guards, the times the quarters are empty. Whoever it is, they are clever, careful, and patient. Colonel Henderson shook his head. Clever or not, someone is using our plantation to hide these children. We must find them before it escalates further. Garrett hesitated. Colonel, with all respect, I believe finding the person will be difficult. They are careful, organized, and they leave no trace. But there is something else. I met her last night. All eyes turned to him. Her, Mrs. Henderson asked. Yes, Garrett said. A young woman, small, quick, and determined. She delivered one of the infants herself. Her name is Lillian. She told me the babies are lost, that someone is trying to save them, and that I must be careful not to expose the network." A hush fell over the room. Colonel Henderson's expression darkened. "You are saying there is someone orchestrating this from outside our supervision, and we are part of their plan?" "Yes," Garrett said. "And she is not alone. Others are helping her. It is a network, likely spread across Montgomery and nearby estates. They move quickly, silently, and they are very good at hiding their tracks." Mrs. Sullivan's eyes widened. "So these infants, they are not abandoned randomly. They are being rescued, hidden from danger, and placed where they can survive. And we have been unknowingly part of that." Garrett nodded. "Exactly. That is why they are left in the quarters. The enslaved population will care for them, and they will not ask questions they should not. But the network must operate carefully. One mistake, and the infants could be lost forever." Colonel Henderson rubbed his forehead. "And yet, we cannot simply allow this to continue without knowing the full story. We have a duty to maintain order and security. We must understand the rules, the network, and their methods." Garrett spoke cautiously. "Colonel, Lillian warned me that exposure would be dangerous. She said if anyone untrained intervened, the children would be at risk. But perhaps we can observe, learn their patterns, and ensure the infants' safety while keeping control of the plantation." Mrs. Henderson, her expression steely, said, "Then we watch. Every movement, every delivery, every clue. We must learn who is involved, why they are involved, and where the infants are coming from. We cannot stop what is happening without putting the children in danger, but we can protect them while uncovering the truth." That night, Garrett returned to the fields, this time with a plan. He stationed 2 men near the northern edge of the quarters, 2 more along the southern boundary. He hid among the cotton rows, eyes fixed on the paths where the shadowy figure might appear. Hours passed with only the wind as company. Then movement. A shadow glided through the mist, small and deliberate, carrying a bundle wrapped in fine cloth. Garrett's heart pounded. He crept forward, careful to remain unseen. The figure paused, crouched near a cabin, and began to place the infant carefully inside. Garrett froze. Lillian. She moved with precision, her hands gentle yet confident. He realized she knew the ground better than anyone, had studied the patrols, and timed her actions down to the second. She worked in silence, a guardian of life hidden among the shadows. A sudden noise, a branch snapping underfoot, made her freeze. Garrett held his breath. She glanced in his direction, then disappeared into the darkness, leaving the infant safely in the cabin. Garrett approached, lifting the bundle. Another infant, healthy, with a faint birthmark on the shoulder. The pattern continued. The network was clever, resourceful, and relentless. And Garrett understood something terrifying. This was not a short-term operation. Someone had been doing this for months, perhaps years. He returned to the main house, the baby in his arms. Colonel Henderson and Mrs. Henderson were waiting, and Garrett reported what he had witnessed. "This network is organized, careful, and fearless. They operate in shadows, leaving no trace. We are merely observers, guardians, and participants in their plan." Colonel Henderson looked grim. "And the risk?" Garrett's voice was steady but filled with weight. "The risk is high. If anyone tries to interfere, the infants could be lost. If the network is exposed, those who save them could be punished, imprisoned, or worse. But if we do nothing, they will continue to arrive here, and the mystery will deepen." Mrs. Henderson nodded. "Then we watch, we protect, and we learn. Every move, every pattern, every delivery. This plantation is now more than a farm. It is a crossroads, a sanctuary, a stage for something far larger than any of us could have imagined." Garrett understood. He was no longer just an overseer. He was a guardian, a witness, and a participant in a secret that reached beyond the cotton fields, beyond the plantation, into a world of danger, courage, and hidden lives. And as dawn broke over Henderson Plantation, Garrett knew one undeniable truth. The shadows were growing stronger, and the network saving the lost children would not stop. The question was simple, but terrifying. Who was next? Part 7. The Unseen Threat. The night air was thick and heavy over Henderson Plantation, carrying a sense of unease that even Garrett could not ignore. Each shadow seemed longer, darker, stretching toward him like fingers. The cotton fields were quiet, unnervingly quiet, and the cabins sat under a silver moon, silent witnesses to a secret no one could fully understand. Garrett walked the perimeter of the quarters, his lantern casting narrow beams of light. Every step was measured, cautious. The weight of the infants, mysterious appearances pressed on him. 10 babies had appeared now, all carefully left, all healthy, all safe, and yet all surrounded by unanswered questions. Inside the main house, the colonel, his wife, and the senior staff gathered for an emergency meeting. The ledger now listed 11 infants. 11 lives that had appeared overnight, defying explanation. The network Garrett had discovered was clearly expanding, or at least moving more boldly. "This cannot continue," Colonel Henderson said, his voice steady but tense. "We are no longer observers. We are participants, whether we like it or not. Each infant increases the risk to the plantation, to the people, and to our own authority." Garrett nodded. "Colonel, we now know this is the work of a network. They are organized, precise, and careful. They study the patrols, the routines, and the guards. They understand how to move without detection. We have only seen a fraction of what they are capable of." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "We must understand the rules they follow. How do they choose the cabins? The timing, the placement, every detail is deliberate. If we can learn the pattern, we can protect the children and maintain control of the plantation." Porter, leaning against the doorframe, spoke quietly. "I watched one of them last night. A girl, small, fast. She moves like a shadow, carrying the infants. I saw her place one in cabin 11. She vanished before I could call out. Whoever is helping her is clever, and likely has accomplices." Cross frowned. "And the risk? If someone discovers them in action, the consequences could be fatal, for the babies, for them, and potentially for the plantation. We cannot stop them without understanding their methods fully." Garrett hesitated. "Colonel, I fear someone else may have noticed more than we realize. The network's secrecy is strong, but perhaps not perfect. One misstep, one misjudgment, and the consequences could be catastrophic. We must remain vigilant, but careful. This is no longer just a mystery. It is a threat, and an opportunity." The colonel considered this, rubbing his forehead. "What do you suggest?" "We observe," Garrett said. "Every movement, every pattern, every detail. We cannot interfere directly yet. If we do, we risk the children and the operatives. We must understand fully before acting. And I suggest we watch for signs of a breach, someone else who may have discovered the network and intends harm." That night, Garrett, Porter, and 2 men stationed themselves at strategic points along the perimeter. The moon was a thin crescent, offering little light. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the rustling of the wind through the cotton. Then movement. A shadow flitted across the northern field, careful, precise. Garrett's breath caught. It was Lillian, carrying a bundle. But she was not alone. A second figure moved behind her, unseen until it stepped into the lantern's glow. Garrett froze. This was not part of the network he knew. This was someone new. The stranger was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a confidence that suggested power and authority. Garrett recognized the danger immediately. If this person was hostile, the entire network, and the infants, could be at risk. He signaled the men to hold position. The stranger stopped near the cabin where Lillian was placing the infant. They spoke in whispers, voices low but urgent. Garrett could not hear the words, but the tension between them was palpable. Then the stranger reached for the infant. Garrett's heart leapt. He was about to intervene when Lillian's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Do not touch them. You have no right." The stranger hesitated, then spoke in a tone that was both calm and threatening. Garrett could hear only fragments. "They belong elsewhere, must be returned, consequences." Lillian shook her head, her grip on the infant firm. "They are lost. They are not yours to take. Do you understand? If you move them, they die." A long pause. Then the stranger finally turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Lillian alone with the infant. Garrett exhaled slowly. This was more than a network. Someone else was watching, someone with their own agenda, and the stakes had just grown immeasurably higher. The next morning, the plantation was tense. Garrett reported the encounter to Colonel Henderson and his wife. Their faces were grim. "So there is another party involved," Colonel Henderson said. "Someone aware of these deliveries, perhaps trying to reclaim the infants for their own purposes." "This complicates everything." "Yes, sir," Garrett replied. "And if we do not act carefully, the children could be lost, or the network exposed. The stranger is powerful, and their intentions are unknown. We must find Lillian and ensure the infants are safe before making any moves." Mrs. Henderson's face was pale but determined. "Then we prepare. We increase observation, we watch the patterns, and we protect the infants. We cannot allow outsiders to interfere, or the consequences could be fatal." Garrett agreed. He began mapping every known delivery, every path, every cabin. He compared times, weather, and other details, searching for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, anything that might allow them to anticipate the network's moves. Days passed. The infants continued to appear, each one placed with care and precision. Lillian moved like a ghost, unseen except by Garrett, who kept a careful distance. But the presence of the mysterious stranger hung over the plantation like a shadow, a threat that could strike at any moment. Garrett realized something terrifying. The network was no longer acting in isolation. Someone else was involved, someone who would not hesitate to take what they wanted. And if the network could be disrupted, the infants could be in grave danger. The plantation had become a battlefield of secrecy, courage, and unseen forces. Garrett understood that every decision, every movement, every choice could tip the balance. And in the back of his mind, he knew that the next delivery could be the most dangerous yet. The question remained: who was the stranger, and how far were they willing to go to claim the children? And as night fell over Henderson Plantation, Garrett watched from the shadows, knowing the stakes had never been higher, and the danger had never been closer. Part 8. Shadows closing in. The night had never felt colder on Henderson Plantation. Mist rolled across the fields like a living thing, and the moon hung thin and pale above the trees. Garrett moved silently through the quarters, his lantern casting trembling circles of light. Every cabin seemed heavier with secrets than the night before. Every shadow felt alive, as if it were watching him, waiting for a mistake. He was not alone. Lillian moved beside him, careful, quiet, her presence almost spectral. Garrett had tracked her for days, watching from a distance, until finally he had realized she could be trusted, or at least that she understood the stakes better than anyone. She carried a bundle wrapped in clean cloth. Another infant, its small face peaceful in sleep. Garrett's chest tightened as he realized the child was the 12th to appear. "We cannot risk leaving it in a cabin tonight," Lillian whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling wind. "The stranger is still out there. I saw him last week. He follows us. He waits. If he takes even one of these children, they will not survive." Garrett nodded, gripping the lantern tighter. He had seen her confront the stranger once before, had watched her stand fearless in the night as the shadowy figure withdrew, but the fear in her eyes now told him this was escalating. Whoever this person was, they were bold, powerful, and relentless. They reached the edge of the northern woods. Lillian set the baby gently on the ground, checking to make sure it was secure. "We move fast," she said. "We have to create a pattern, make it confusing. They cannot predict our movements." Garrett followed, listening. The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch snapped. Both of them froze. Their hearts pounded in the quiet. Garrett strained his eyes. For a moment, nothing. Then movement, a tall figure slipping through the shadows, quick, controlled, silent. The stranger. Lillian's hand gripped Garrett's arm. "Stay back. Don't interfere. If you reveal yourself, everything will be lost." Garrett wanted to argue, to act, but he knew she was right. One mistake could ruin everything. The stranger approached the baby, crouching low, his intent obvious. Garrett could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The figure paused, scanning the surroundings. Then, with careful hands, he lifted the infant. Lillian stepped forward suddenly. "Stop," she shouted, her voice breaking the silence. The stranger froze, holding the baby at arm's length. You do not know what you are doing. These children are lost. You cannot take them. The figure lowered the bundle slowly, a dangerous calm in his movements. They are not lost, he said, his voice deep, cold. They belong to the families who cannot care for them. They will be returned. They are alive now, Lillian said, stepping closer, her eyes fierce. If you take them, you endanger them. You do not understand what it takes to protect them. For a long moment, neither moved. The mist swirled around them, the cotton fields silent witnesses to the standoff. Garrett could feel his hands trembling. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but he stayed frozen, trusting Lillian's command. Finally, the stranger spoke again. Then you are part of this, guardian. But the rules are not yours to set. You cannot stop what has begun. Without another word, he vanished into the mist, leaving only a cold echo behind. Lillian sank to the ground, exhausted, clutching the infant. Garrett knelt beside her. We cannot keep doing this, he said. He will not stop. He is getting bolder. I know, Lillian whispered, tears running down her cheeks. And there are more of them out there. More babies, more children in danger. We have to move faster, be smarter. If we fail even once, they will be lost forever. The next morning, Garrett reported everything to Colonel Henderson and his wife. Their faces were grim. The ledger had grown longer, the mystery deeper, and now a clear threat loomed. Someone had discovered the network. Someone was following the children, watching, waiting. Colonel Henderson spoke slowly. This goes beyond the plantation. Whoever this is, they are organized, capable, and dangerous. We must protect the infants, but we must also learn who this person is and what they want. If they succeed in taking a child, the consequences could be disastrous. Mrs. Henderson's expression was icy. Then we strengthen our observation. Every delivery, every path, every cabin. Garrett, you and Lillian must coordinate. We need to anticipate the stranger's moves before they act again. Garrett nodded. He knew the risks. Every delivery was a gamble, every night a test of courage, patience, and cunning. The infants were safe for now, but the shadow over Henderson Plantation had grown darker, heavier, and closer. That evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon, Garrett and Lillian prepared for another delivery. The children had to be moved, hidden, protected. Every moment was precious. The air was thick with fear and determination, a sense of history pressing down on them, reminding them that the choices they made tonight could ripple across lives and time. As they slipped into the night, Garrett felt the unmistakable prickle of being watched. The stranger was out there, somewhere, and he would not be denied. The network was clever, but its enemies were relentless. And Henderson Plantation had become a stage for a silent war, where the stakes were life and death, innocence and cruelty, hope and despair. The question loomed over them, sharper than any blade. Could they save the children, or would the shadows finally claim them? And in the cold, misted fields, the answer remained unseen, a secret waiting to be revealed. Part 8 ends with mounting tension, the mysterious stranger escalating the threat, and the network's challenge becoming increasingly urgent. I can continue with Part 9, where the network faces its most dangerous night yet and a shocking discovery threatens everything. Do you want me to continue with Part 9? Part 9, The Night of Reckoning. The night air hung heavy over Henderson Plantation, the moon swallowed by thick clouds, and the wind carried a chill that made the hairs on Garrett's neck stand on end. Every step through the quarters felt dangerous, as if the shadows themselves were alive and watching. Tonight was different. Garrett could feel it in his bones. Lillian moved beside him, her eyes sharp, every sense alert. They were carrying the latest infant, the 13th to appear, a baby with bright blue eyes and a fine mop of pale hair. Garrett had long stopped counting, but the weight of responsibility never lessened. Each child was a life they had to protect, and failure was unthinkable. We can't let him take this one, Lillian whispered. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the bundle. He's been waiting. I can feel it. Garrett nodded. We move carefully. Every shadow, every sound, every rustle of the wind, we treat it as danger. They crept toward the northern woods, where a hidden path led to an abandoned cabin that had once stored tobacco. It was crumbling, the roof half collapsed, but it offered the only place where the infants could be safely hidden. Garrett's lantern threw long, jittering beams across the field, and each step seemed louder than the last. Then came the sound, a faint snapping of a branch, deliberate, careful. Both froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, broad, and unmistakable. The stranger. Garrett's hand went instinctively to his side, though he had nothing to draw. The figure stopped, studying them, the mist curling around him like a cloak. "Do not move," he said, voice low and icy. "You cannot protect them forever. They belong elsewhere. They belong alive," Lillian snapped, stepping forward, her small frame standing defiantly. "You do not understand what it takes to keep them safe. You do not care about them at all." The stranger tilted his head. "I care about order, about duty. They are not safe here, and neither are you." Garrett felt the tension coil like a spring. "You've been following them, watching, planning. Who are you? What do you want?" The stranger's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I am the one who ensures the balance. The children have a purpose. If they are misplaced, the consequences will ripple far beyond this plantation." Lillian's face went pale, but she did not back down. "And you think leaving them alone, starving, or hidden, is balance? You have no right." For a tense moment, no one moved. The wind whispered through the trees. Garrett could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady, trying to mask the fear he felt. Then, almost imperceptibly, the stranger shifted, moving closer to the infant. "Now," he said, and something in his tone made Garrett realize they had only seconds to act. Lillian lunged forward, scooping the baby higher, shielding it with her body. Garrett stepped in front of her, lantern held high, casting a circle of light that caught the stranger's eyes. The man paused, then slowly retreated, disappearing into the fog and darkness without a sound, leaving only the echo of his warning behind. Both of them exhaled, hearts pounding. Lillian lowered the infant gently into Garrett's arms. "He's getting more daring," she said. "Next time, he won't hesitate." Garrett nodded grimly. "We need a plan. We need to understand why he is doing this, and how many more are involved. If we don't act, we could lose them all." The next morning, the plantation was restless. The enslaved population whispered about shadows and spirits. Rumors spread like wildfire. Garrett and the colonel realized that the threat was not only real but also growing bolder, and the risk of exposure increased with each passing day. Colonel Henderson convened another meeting of the senior staff. "This stranger is no ordinary person," he said, voice tight. "We know he is organized, resourceful, and likely knows more about these children than we do. Garrett, Lillian, you are our only chance of keeping them safe. We need intelligence, observation, and strategy." Garrett nodded. "We've mapped every path, every delivery, every known pattern. But he moves like a ghost, and each night brings a new threat. We cannot confront him directly without risking the children. Mrs. Henderson's voice was steady but sharp. Then we create traps, observation points, signals, diversions. He must reveal his methods eventually. He cannot remain perfect forever." Garrett and Lillian worked through the day, setting hidden markers, creating signals to alert them to the stranger's approach, and carefully planning every step of the infant's movements. Each delivery became a test of skill, patience, and courage. The night came again, darker than the last. Mist covered the fields like a blanket. Garrett and Lillian moved silently, carrying the 14th infant. They followed the paths they had rehearsed, keeping to the shadows, every step calculated. Halfway through, Garrett froze. There, in the mist, the stranger emerged. But this time, he was not alone. Another figure, smaller, moved behind him, and Garrett realized with horror that there were more of them than he had thought. The network they had been trying to protect was being hunted, and they were outnumbered. Lillian tightened her grip on the infant. "We cannot let them take him," she whispered. Garrett looked at her, fear and resolve mixing. "We fight with what we have. We use the night, the shadows, the terrain. We protect them at all costs." The stranger stepped forward, the smaller figure mirroring his movements. Garrett and Lillian pressed forward into the abandoned cabin, barricading the door and huddling with the infant. The wind howled outside. Every moment felt stretched, every sound amplified, as if the night itself were holding its breath. They could hear the strangers circling, waiting, planning. Garrett's mind raced. They needed a way to escape, to protect the child, to survive. And then it hit him. A hidden trapdoor beneath the floorboards, long forgotten, leading to a network of old tunnels used for tobacco storage decades ago. This way, he whispered, leading Lillian to the hatch. They slipped into the darkness, the baby held tight, hearts pounding. The strangers paused at the cabin, unaware that their quarry had vanished. For the first time, Garrett felt a sliver of hope. They had survived the night. But the network was no longer just a secret. It was a battlefield, and the stranger, and perhaps others like him, would not give up. As they moved through the tunnels, Garrett realized that the next night would be even more dangerous. They would have to stay one step ahead, think faster, and trust each other completely. And somewhere above, in the cold, misted fields of Henderson Plantation, the shadows waited, patient and relentless, for the next move. Part 9 ends with a high-stakes confrontation, reveals the stranger has allies, and shows Garrett and Lillian narrowly escaping, setting the stage for the final part. I can now create Part 10, the thrilling conclusion where secrets are revealed, dangers resolved, and the fates of the infants determined. Do you want me to continue with Part 10? Part 10. Secrets revealed. The sun rose slowly over Henderson Plantation, casting long shadows across the cotton fields. The air was crisp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and the tension of countless nights spent in fear. Garrett stood at the edge of the quarters, watching the workers begin their day. His mind was elsewhere. Tonight, the mystery would end. For months, white infants had appeared, one after another, each carefully placed in cabins, each protected from harm. Garrett and Lillian had moved them, hidden them, and defended them from a shadowy figure who seemed to know their every move. But now, all the pieces were coming together. Lillian arrived quietly, carrying the 15th infant. This one must be hidden first, she whispered. Then we confront them. We find out why, and we end this. Garrett nodded. They moved through the northern woods to the abandoned tobacco cabin, where the infants were now hidden safely. The air was tense, the quiet broken only by the soft rustle of leaves. Garrett felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Failure was not an option. As night fell, the shadow returned, the same tall figure who had stalked them for weeks. But tonight, Garrett noticed something different. He was not alone. Two other figures moved behind him, careful, precise, almost ghost-like. Garrett and Lillian exchanged a glance, both understanding that the final confrontation had come. The stranger spoke, his voice echoing across the fields. You cannot protect them forever. They belong to their families, to the world. Your interference only delays the inevitable. Lillian stepped forward, her small frame unyielding. We protect them because no one else will. These children are alive. They deserve life, not secrets and shame. The shadow hesitated. Then, slowly, he removed his hood. Garrett saw the face of a man he knew from Montgomery, a wealthy merchant with connections to the city's elite. His eyes were cold, but there was a flicker of something else, guilt, perhaps, or fear. They are my family, the man confessed, voice low. Children born in households where their existence would ruin reputations. They would be hidden, sold, forgotten. I could not allow that. I chose this plantation because it is remote, discreet, and because I trusted you to care for them. Garrett's mind reeled. All this time, the mystery had been driven by compassion, twisted by secrecy and fear. The infants were children of powerful families, abandoned to protect names and fortunes. And this man had risked everything to save them. Lillian's voice trembled, but she held the baby tightly. Why not come forward sooner? Why not tell someone? Because no one would have believed me, he said. And if they had, the children would have been taken away, scattered, or worse. For the first time, Garrett understood the full weight of their actions. Every night spent moving infants, every moment of fear, every confrontation, it had all been to protect these lives. And now, the danger could finally end. Colonel Henderson and his wife arrived, having been alerted to the stranger's confession. The colonel's eyes were hard but fair. We will ensure these children are safe, he said. No one will harm them now. They will be placed with caretakers who understand their needs and can protect them from the world that rejected them. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her hands gentle as she touched the infant Lillian held. They will have a future, she said softly. One free from fear, from secrecy, from shame. We will make sure of it. Over the next few weeks, the children were quietly moved to safe homes, families who would nurture them and ensure their safety. Garrett and Lillian worked tirelessly, coordinating each transfer, never stopping until every infant was secure. The shadowy figure from Montgomery disappeared back into the world of wealth and secrecy, leaving only the knowledge that his actions had saved lives. As the plantation returned to normal, Garrett walked through the fields, the weight of the past months heavy but easing with each step. He knew the world was not kind, not fair, and not just. But he also knew that courage, compassion, and determination could protect the innocent even in the darkest times. Lillian joined him, carrying the last empty bundle. It's over, she said, her voice soft but strong. All of them are safe. Garrett nodded. Yes, and we've learned something important. That even in a world built on cruelty and fear, there is room for hope. And action. We must act when we can, even if the risks are great. The sun rose higher, bathing Henderson Plantation in light. The shadows had been driven back, the secrets revealed, and the children safe. But Garrett knew the world would never forget the strange, terrifying nights when infants appeared like ghosts, and a network of courage, secrecy, and love had fought to protect them. And now, the story could be told. If you enjoyed this journey into the hidden history and dark mysteries of Henderson Plantation, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling historical stories. Share this video with friends who love suspense and history, and leave a comment telling us which part of the story shocked you the most. Your support keeps these stories alive.